goodness, looks like it is 12 o'clock, and I want to be mindful of everybody's time. Some of you may be joining us over your lunch half an hour. My name is Michelle Lane. I am the Senior Director for Community Health and Wellness here at North Kansas City Hospital, and I am so excited to be sharing this information with you. I'm going to kind of dive right in. It's only a half an hour talk, and I don't want to lose any of this time because we've got so much information to share. You know, we can all think about a difficult conversation that we may have had. You know, maybe it was a challenging performance evaluation, or pretty much any conversation you've ever had with a teenager or a loved one, because they can trigger us more than anybody in the world. Or maybe it's something more serious, like a sexist comment in a company-wide email, or just having problems dealing with a team that you're working with. Conflict is absolutely everywhere. But for sure today, one group I am not going to be talking about is toddlers. There is no reasoning with these little monsters. I don't know if you guys have seen the latest viral trend, the things I've done to upset my toddler this week. It is worth every moment of every lunch hour to be able to watch this. It is so entertaining. Very, very good. I recommend it. But in all seriousness, you know, these conversations are really hard. And they're really hard, quite simply, because we're human. And as a species, on an evolutionary and psychology basis, or anthropology base, however you want to say it, we need groups. We are used to living in tribes. We need that interaction and the safety of others innate in our core. And so we don't want anything to upset that or break the balance or harmony of the groups or the systems that we're part of. So it's just really part of who we are to create safe spaces. And, you know, at their worst, these difficult conversations can be absolutely demoralizing and destructive. People can quit jobs and relationships, ruin lives with difficult conversations. But at the best, they can actually be life-changing or transformative with just a little bit of thought and a little bit of work going into the conversation. They have the potential to empower people to have deeper and richer and meaningful conversations and relationships. And I think that's so important. And I'm just really grateful that you have decided to spend the next 30 minutes with me over your lunch hour and learning how to improve your difficult conversations that you have. I've got 25 years of experience in healthcare and a psychology degree to boot. And I think that healthcare providers are actually some of the very best difficult conversation havers. If you think about it, you know, they've got to give really bad news most of the time because of an accident or a diagnosis. And they clearly stick to the facts. There's no exaggerating. There's no storytelling like most of us do. It's just the facts. They tend to be empathetic. They're honest. They don't sit on something because it's going to be awkward to talk about that diagnosis. They don't put it in their to-do pile later. They don't sugarcoat it. They just lean into the conversation. So I am so happy that I've had so many wonderful role models teaching me along the way for years on how to have a difficult conversation. And, you know, to be honest, my 15-year-old self would have never thought that I would be the one sharing techniques on how to have a difficult conversation in my future. But enough people have told me, wow, you are really good at this, that I got up enough courage to put the information and my thoughts together that I'm going to share with you today. So at the end of our conversation, I'm going to convert this program into a YouTube link. I'm going to email it out to you using the email that you enrolled in the program to begin with. And then I'm also going to include all the tools that I'm going to talk about today. And I'm going to include the slides that have numerous notes in them and examples and role playing. So you can use these as tools afterwards. I don't want this to be just 30 minutes where you sit and you listen and you walk away and go, okay, yeah, that makes sense. And you don't ever do anything. And it might be just like some notes on a little tiny, you know, Post-it that you don't do anything with. So I really want everybody to focus during this conversation and think about maybe a difficult conversation that you need to have, and use that in the back of your mind as I roll through some of the skills that are necessary to have a successful conversation. And so we're going to go ahead and dive right in. And, you know, I think the most important thing when you think about, do I need to have a difficult conversation with this person, is to think about, what would the outcome even be? What's the purpose of having this conversation to begin with? And so This will help you decide whether to even raise this as an issue. I love avoiding. It's easy. It's quite wonderful, to be honest. But most of the time we can't avoid. And so we need to turn and have these difficult conversations, whether it's with our children or relationships or within our work setting. So I'm going to try to use different examples as we move through. And I don't want to spend a lot of time, but I do want to review quickly just kind of the 7 signs that there are that you may need to have a difficult conversation. So kind of be thinking through your own life experiences and what's going on. So first reason, of course, would be you've got some ongoing conflict or tension, this persistent disagreement with somebody, right? And, I think about The Office. I think that's one of the funniest shows ever. But Jim and Dwight, that's the perfect example of a persistent rivalry, right? They engage in these petty conflicts, and it really is disruptive to their colleagues and the work environment. So ongoing conflict, probably need to talk about it. Avoidance behavior. You or somebody else are avoiding each other, or you're avoiding a topic to be able to, prevent some sort of confrontation from happening. And I think a good example of this would be the Friends episode where Ross and Rachel avoid discussing about their feelings after their breakup. And this leads to so many awkward situations that basically tend to cause a lot of tension within their friend group. So that is something that would need a difficult conversation. One of the main reasons most of us have difficult conversations is our feelings, right? We're feeling frustrated, angry, resentment, or we're sad, or we've got some sort of lingering thing that's impacting our mental health. And so we want to talk about it. So that's one of the more common ones. A fourth reason you may need to have a difficult conversation is just a misunderstanding. Sometimes you have repeated misunderstandings or miscommunications with a certain person. Sometimes that can be manipulative. Sometimes that can be on purpose for power or control in a work setting. But miscommunication is a problem. And I love Seinfeld. There's so many episodes that revolve around miscommunications and misunderstandings. I personally like the Chinese restaurant episode. They have got all these miscommunications that lead to them not even being able to get a table, and some frustration within the group. So that would be something that you would need to have a difficult conversation about. And then the last 3 reasons, one is that you want to offer feedback to somebody, or you want to see a behavior change in somebody. And this could be, in a work setting or within a relationship. And these are hard conversations to have, and you want to make sure that you're checking your own intention in these situations, because if the greater good is to make a point or to, downplay somebody or make them feel incompetent, you want to make sure that's not the intention whatsoever when you have something where you're offering feedback or telling somebody about a behavior change. Now, if you're in a hierarchical setting, like in a work setting, a boss, or your children or something like that, that's a little bit easier. Now, the 6th thing that makes people have a lot of difficult conversations is a violation of our boundaries or our values. So somebody's kind of crossed a personal or professional boundary or violated our core value. And an example of this, I think, is like Breaking Bad. Walter White, he repeatedly violates the personal and professional boundaries of his partner, Jesse, and he totally disregards all of Jesse's values. And this gives tons of conflict to that series. And then lastly, one of the reasons we need to sometimes have a difficult conversation is that it's impacting other people around us. And an example of this would be in the TV show, The Office, which I just think is the best TV show, by the way. Michael Scott, he has some really inappropriate behavior surrounding this Diversity Day is what the episode is. And so he is so insensitive in handling this diversity training. It causes discomfort. Everybody's feeling offended. And so that's something that needs to have a difficult conversation. So I would love if you do feel comfortable to share in the chat, if I did have time to turn your chat on, to share what difficult conversation you may need to be having that lives rent-free in your mind. Because I can try to use an example to help some of the ones. So if I see them pop up in the chat, that might be something I use as an example to try to help people get jump started in how to have these difficult conversations. So we've established why we need to have this difficult conversation to begin with. But the heavy lift really comes from the internal work, the pre-work that must be done before the meeting. And so if you think about this, iceberg analogy, I like to use the underwater analogy of the Hawaiian Islands. Most people don't know that the tallest mountain in the world is actually one of the Hawaiian Islands from base to summit, but it's all underwater. And this is what the pre-work is. This is all that stuff that you're going to do before you have that difficult conversation with the person. And we could probably spend like a 3-week seminar on how to do this pre-work, this internal work, or a half-day seminar. And since we just have 30 minutes, I'm going to primarily focus on the difficult conversation itself, but I do want to just kind of talk about it real quickly. So typically in a difficult conversation, there's really 3 conversations in that one conversation. And you can prepare for that conversation by walking through those other 3 conversations before the event. And so those 3 conversations are what happened, right? So you can sort out in your mind what you saw happen. How did you see the situation? Are you telling yourself a story? Is there some past experience or trauma that's affected the way that you view this situation? What do you think the other person's, viewpoint might be? Or what impact has that had on the situation? So the what happened in the situation, and we do this naturally. When we've had a conversation or there's something that somebody has done that makes us think, remember those 7 things that you could possibly have a difficult conversation about, we think about, oh, wow, they said this and I thought that, and maybe they meant that, and surely that couldn't have been their intention, right? And so doing that pre-work is really important to kind of sort through what questions you might have. Whenever I'm preparing for any type of difficult conversation, I write this stuff out. I literally script it. And it's not exactly how this situation is going to go down. We know once emotions get, caught up in it, it's going to go different directions. But having a plan that we're going to talk about today with these 4 strategies is really going to help you be successful in what you're trying to talk about. So the first conversation inside that big conversation is what happened. The second conversation is your identity conversation. So you need to ground your identity. You need to think about, how does this situation threaten me or potentially, shake up my sense of identity or morals or values? I mean, it's basically, how do you see yourself and how do you think what has happened affects that? Like, I'm a boss. Why are they, talking back? They should be listening or doing what I say. Or I like competition and I was treating that conversation more competitively, or I'm a really loyal person. Why are they thinking that I'm not a loyal person? And so it's kind of that self-identity of what's triggered you in that, that you really want to have that difficult conversation to begin with. And then third in that big conversation is this feelings conversation. And so this is all the pre-work that you're going to do before you actually sit down and have that difficult conversation. And exploring our feelings, this is hard. This is really hard stuff. You have to be comfortable with this unavoidable discomfort of these conversations. You're not going to be like Mary Poppins. It's not going to go down with a spoonful of sugar, okay? But you can get there. But unfortunately, many of us are not taught to feel or process our emotions and our feelings. It's not fun, but it's so necessary. And this is this self-work that we all need to be doing in order to have difficult conversations, but also be a better person and relate to people better. One of my favorite authors is a set of twin sisters, Dr. Emily and Amelia Nagoski. And they talk about emotions being tunnels in their book about stress. And it absolutely resonated with me. And so I want to just talk about it for just a minute, if you don't mind. So they describe emotions as tunnels with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And you have to move through the entire tunnel to come out on the other side. And this metaphor emphasizes the importance of experiencing, processing fully rather than trying to suppress or avoid or numb yourself to the emotions that you have. And we all do that. We all feel something and then we're like, stuff it down, put it under the carpet, go have a beer, eat tater tots. That's what I like to do. Instead of really feeling the emotion and processing the emotion. So the Nagoski sisters emphasize that you need to complete this stress cycle by engaging in activities that help us process our emotions, such as physical activity, creative expression, or social connection. And I'll give some examples of that on the next slide. But what I love is that they highlight that unprocessed emotions can lead to burnout, and their research shows that it can also have negative health outcomes to anybody who doesn't process their emotions well. So this is magical because it encourages us to acknowledge our emotions, to find constructive ways to deal with them. And it highlights the fact that emotions are not permanent states. These are a process that you have to walk through completely. You can't just feel it, stuff it away, and expect it to go somewhere. It's not. It's going to live in your physical. It's going to live in your mental. It's not going anywhere. So one way to work through and identify your emotions is this feelings wheel. And we want you not to be able to get stuck in that tunnel. And so this is how you use it. If you look at the center of the wheel, that's like the basic emotions, happy, sad. It's like the vanilla emotions. It doesn't really tell you that much. And from that basic emotion, you're going to move out to more of a specific feeling. So the wheel is kind of divided in layers. And so if you're feeling angry, you could think, like, oh, I just want to like punch somebody, right? I'm aggressive. And that helps you kind of get forward in that. And then you can think, why? Why am I feeling so aggressive? Well, that's because I feel betrayed. And so being able to put words to not just like, I'm angry, but weaseling your way down in there into the feels of like what you're really feeling. And then moving from that into things that will help you process that emotion, like journaling, meditation, mindfulness, therapy or counseling. Been there, done that, still do it. Exercise, having a creative outlet like music or art. We've got an art therapy class that we've partnered with Beacon Mental Health coming up. I think it's in a couple weeks. Breathing exercises. If you don't have the Calm app, what is wrong with you people? The Calm app is amazing. It's a free Calm app and it has Harry Styles reading you bedtime stories. There is nothing better. So talking to friends and family, and I don't like the word vent, so I don't use vent. I think dryers vent. I think humans need to process. So using time to talk through this, talk through the difficult conversation you want to have, talk through your emotions is a wonderful way to get through the tunnel of your emotions. You can use a feelings wheel, you can do self-mapping, you can do compassion practices. And I have all of these examples and other examples listed out in my notes that I'll be emailing to you after this talk today. But once you have identified, the emotion and you've processed through the emotion, this is a little algorithm that I use that helps me recognize when I know that I'm ready to have that difficult conversation with the person. So if I'm ready to be able to sit next to them and not across from them, if I'm ready to put the problem in front of both of us instead of like over there by them, right? If I'm willing to listen and ask questions and accept that I am partially responsible for what is happening, if I'm ready to acknowledge that, maybe what they do is really great and not pick apart their mistakes. I grew up in a really critical household, and picking people apart and recognizing people's mistakes is one of my special skills that I have to keep a lid on. I also know that I'm ready to have this conversation when I'm owning my own part in it, right? When I can talk about resolving these issues and the challenges and focus on the outcome that I want, I know I'm ready to have this talk. And the final stage, when I know I'm ready to sit down and I've processed my emotions and I've thought about, how this is affected my identity or my morals or my values or what really happened, is when I can model the vulnerability that I really want to see in the other person and having this real conversation. So as you can tell, there's like an arrow that goes through that. That's kind of the stages that I know. And I've done this so many times that I recognize where I am and what I need to be doing to better prepare myself in these situations. But this is when I know that I am ready to talk. And so we've established, right, that you need to have a difficult conversation. You have done the pre-work. You have worked through your emotions. You've identified where your morals and values were disrupted. And now these are the 4 strategies. And yes, they seem pretty simple. It's like 9 words. It's not a lot. but these are the core of what can magically change your difficult conversations. And I'm going to go through each of these in more detail with examples and role playing. And remember, I want you to be thinking of that difficult conversation that you have had that, or need to have. And we can kind of maybe talk about that or use that as an example. So we want to acknowledge responsibility. We want to define what outcome we're looking for. We want to listen and validate. Can't repeat that enough. That might be like one of my first tattoos I ever get is like listen and validate right here on my left forearm. And then lastly, we want to restate the outcome. And so let's kind of dive in because these 4 techniques have really helped me stay on focus when I need to, not have my conversation hijacked by my emotions. They have really grounded me. And so, number one, I always, without a doubt, start the conversation by acknowledging my responsibility in this mess that we're about ready to talk about, whether it's the fact that I've avoided dealing with it sooner, or maybe I've contributed to the situation to begin with. I'm going to acknowledge that right up front. And one of the reasons why that's so important is because by accepting some of the responsibility, you're diffusing the other person's emotions and you're kind of honoring them a little bit, right? By starting by going first and saying, "Ooh, okay, all right, I realize that I've been avoiding this conversation way too much, and that has probably, made it much worse than it needs to be, and I should have addressed it sooner," right? That would immediately make somebody go, "Huh, okay, this is maybe it's going to go better than I thought it is going to be," right? On some level. It really just evens the playing field when you need to get into those difficult things that you're going to be talking about. It also helps put the person that you're speaking to a little at ease, and then they're able to listen just a little bit more. And so in the notes that I'm going to send to everybody, I have put examples about how to acknowledge responsibility in these 8 different situations. And I think that most conflicts kind of fall into these 8 situations. So we've talked about emotions, right? So I can say this in my sleep, I acknowledge that my initial reaction was overly emotional and that did not help the situation. I should have taken a moment to calm down before I responded or talked to you, right? So that's the way to start the conversation, by getting on an even playing field, acknowledging that maybe I freaking blew up when the last time was that we talked about it. We all play a role in these conversations to get to have a difficult conversation to begin with. So one of the other ones that I need to use a lot is unrealistic expectations. I usually will say to somebody, I set some expectations that were not realistic before discussing them with you. And I can see now that that was really unfair to you and maybe put unnecessary pressure on you because you were trying to live up to the story that I had created in my head, and that wasn't reality. And so a lot of times, conflict is because you have this expectation of what's going to happen or what somebody's going to say. And it's you are the one with this, not greeted, on reality, the facts of what this conversation is going to be. You're telling yourself a story. So another one that's pretty common is, taking control of a situation. So I've taken control of some aspects of this project without consulting you. And that really wasn't right. I should have involved you more in the decision-making process. So I'm going to look at the chat and see if there's somebody that had put one of the things that they were, working on in there. Let's see. Oh, yeah, I love this. So somebody said that they have an ex-husband's new wife that's overstepping her boundaries in a parenting matter, right? So, maybe this is just, a misunderstanding, right? So you could say, I understand that maybe, you have misunderstood my intentions and that's led to some tension, but I want to take responsibility and for not clarifying what your role would be in this parenting situation, and just kind of take it from there, right? And just say, man, that was kind of my fault. I wasn't clear on how I felt you needed to play a role in my child's life. So that's a great example there. So acknowledging responsibility, the very first thing that you need to do in any of these difficult conversations, for sure. So the second strategy is defining the outcome. And this sounds bulbous. It sounds opaque, where you can't even really put your finger on it. But you need to know what your goal is for this conversation. Never, ever go into a difficult conversation without stating the outcome that you want first. The reason why the outcome is so important is because this conversation is going to be a roller coaster, okay? The person that you're talking to may get upset. You yourself may get emotional at some point, whether you're angry or you're triggered or you're sad. And so when you ride that roller coaster of emotion within this conversation, going back to your purpose of what you will want to accomplish is going to stabilize the thoughts, and it's going to get you the outcome that you want, right? So you're having this conversation because you're committed to making this relationship better. You're having this conversation because this just is not working. You're having this conversation because you want to give somebody feedback, because you are deeply embedded in their success. You want them to succeed. And so I want to be able to offer you a little feedback. That is the outcome. So focus repeatedly on the outcome. If you feel yourself getting emotional, come back to it and say, own it. I feel like I'm getting a little emotional here, and I want to just bring us back to what we are going to be doing here. The goal of what we're doing here is, for us to resolve this misunderstanding that we've had for the last few weeks. I value our friendship, and I want to make sure that we're both feeling heard and understood so we can move past this whole thing. So sharing what you want to happen right up front. So own your accountability. I did this, I did that, I am sorry. And I wanted to have this difficult conversation with you. There is nothing wrong with just saying that. I want to have a difficult conversation with you, owning that this is going to be difficult for both of you. You can even say, I care so much about what we're going to talk about. I even role played with a friend. I wrote out what I wanted to say, but most importantly, this is what I want to happen in this conversation. Addressing a concern with a roommate, right? My goal is to address the cleanliness of our shared space. I want us to agree on a cleaning schedule that works for both of us so we can maintain a comfortable living environment, right? Or my favorite, providing feedback to a family member. I need to talk to you about maybe some of the recent comments that you have made and how they made me feel. My goal is to help you understand my perspective so that we can avoid hurting feelings in the future and really strengthen our relationship, because it's important to me, right? That's hard, right? We all have got those family members that say stuff, but it's okay that we say that it's not okay for them to treat you that way. As long as we are clear and we are calm and we are owning the accountability that we have in this conversation. Sometimes, we need to discuss expectations with a kid, right? I have recently, had this conversation with my own child. I want to talk to you about some of the responsibilities here at home. It's really important for me that you, understand what they are, because I want us to work together as a team and not have any of these misunderstandings. That's just a way to say, clean your room, kid, but nicely, right? Especially if you have an older adult child that you need to set, some standards with. Sometimes we are working on relationships with people, right? And so you may say, I want to strengthen our working relationship. I feel that, there's been a lot of recent tension that is created a divide between us. And I want to discuss how maybe we could collaborate better and support each other better. These are all wonderful ways. And I have about 20 different examples with different scenarios that are opportunities that you can express what you want to happen in this conversation. So I have headings for each of them. So I will send those out afterwards. But by defining clearly and specifically what you want the outcome of this conversation to be, first, it sets a constructive tone for the conversation, and it's going to increase the likelihood that you're going to reach this positive resolution. Because when things start to get heated, you could say, oh man, holy cow, I think we're going off the rails here. Name calling isn't going to help any of this situation. I hope that we can rebuild some trust between the two of us. I know that, recently we've had some damage to our relationship, and I want to discuss how we can move forward and not continue to, criticize each other this way. So we can rope them back by saying what we want out of this conversation. So that is the second thing you need to do to have a great, difficult conversation. The third thing that is so important, and you're going to do a lot of this in the conversation, is listen and validate. Remember, I said that's going to be one of my first tattoos. You're going to say what you need to say, and then that other person is going to react. And instead of arguing with them or debating or wanting to be right, I need you to listen and I need you to validate what that person is saying. And this really kind of maybe even sounds counterproductive, but honestly, it is one of the most powerful things that you can do in a conversation, whether you're fighting with your kids over a curfew or you're arguing with somebody at work over workload. You need to hear where that person is at. The moment you say, wow, that must have been really hard dealing with that, or oh, I totally get why you were avoiding me. Or if I felt that way, I would have probably done the same thing. The second you validate somebody, they immediately stop defending themselves. It's unbelievable. It is so unbelievable. It is like a magic wand you can just put everywhere. So validating is one of the most powerful things. And I know what you're thinking, like, well, what if I don't agree, right? And here's the deal. What is the outcome you want from this conversation? Is being right the outcome? Well, if being right is the outcome, when you did your pre-work and you thought, why do I want to have this conversation? Wanting to be right is not a reason to have a difficult conversation. Wanting to move forward in a relationship is a reason to have a difficult conversation, right? And so sometimes you got to eat crow. Maybe that might be what you say, right? But listening and actively listening. We all have had those situations, maybe, you've called in to get help with something on the computer or whatever, a bill, right? Everybody has to call Google and, talk about their bill or insurance. And there's nothing more infuriating when somebody overtalks you, when somebody doesn't listen to you, when somebody isn't actively engaged in the conversation, maybe sounding like they're scripted. These are all things that are going to just turn this conversation down the tube. So the key is to shift your thinking from thinking, I need to explain myself to them or I need to deliver a message. Not the point. Your point is you need to listen and you need to learn more about what's going on. And that listening is really the hard part. And when you're listening, I've got a list of some things that you can say to help validate people. And I've got them listed on the screen, some of them, wow, I can understand why you felt blah, blah, blah. Now that you've told me this, I can totally understand why, fill in the blank. I want to make sure I understand this correctly. So what I'm hearing you say is, these are all validating things. You don't need to memorize all of these lists. I have like 2 or 3 go-tos that I use for being accountable for my emotions. In the beginning of the conversation, I've got 2 or 3 outcomes usually that I use repetitively. You don't have to memorize a book. You can also Google, Chat GPT this stuff, okay? There are plenty of validating sentences out there, and all you need to do is know 2 or 3 of them. One of the easiest ones to say is, and what else? What else? What am I not thinking of, right? And that can get that conversation going more. So lastly, you will come back to the final thing, which is restating the outcome. Always the outcome. Keep coming back to it. Keep coming back to it. And yeah, it's not going to be a lot of fun. It's not going to be easy. You're going to have all sorts of emotions coming up because you've been avoiding this conversation to begin with, right? But I'm telling you right now that if you find the confidence and the courage to go through and start this thing and work through this difficult conversation and own what you have done, be accountable for it in the beginning of that conversation, to state what you want the outcome to be, whether that's a better relationship with your college-age child or, less hatred looks across the street from your neighbor, whatever it is, right? State what you want and then listen and validate, right? So to recap, I'll tell you what, validate and validate and validate and keep talking. And it is so amazing how easy this will come to you. And if you really want to make it easier on yourself, like I said, rehearse it with a friend. At the end of this talk, I'm going to give you my contact information. I would be happy to write up some role playing and suggestions for you if you'd like me to. It's really easy to be the person not involved in a situation, to help guide that conversation. remember, it's down to one super important thing, and that's your ability, my ability to separate my own emotions about doing, this thing where I defend myself and actually talk to the person and listen to the person and get to the outcome that I want to cause. So those are the 4 steps. And so I've got my contact information here, but I woke up in the middle of the night and I had a thought about wanting to provide some bonus features to this talk, because one of the things that we're not good at is having these types of conversations where we rein it back in without being adversarial or aggressive, or it's just really hard. It's not the way we were taught. So I built a couple of slides with some examples of things that when you're in the heat of the conversation, the difficult conversation, that you could maybe use. And I'll provide these for you, but they're really simple. The story I made up in this situation is blah, blah, blah. I'm curious about your feelings. I'm curious about why you said this. Tell me more. Walk me through what you were thinking. Or even when it gets really, really ugly, right? You could say, we're both absolutely dug in right now. Tell me why you're so passionate about this, right? And you'd be surprised what people might say, right? Saying something like, I'm working from these assumptions, what about you, is a nice way to be able to keep that conversation going. And then I've got more listed here, but I think we are out of time, but I do want to answer any questions that anybody may have. And like I said, I'm going to send you the slides. I'm going to send the recording of this. I've got my contact information in here. I will send you a PDF of the feelings wheel that I think is one of the most, I actually have a feelings wheel sitting here on my desk, nerdy as that is. And I'll send all of that to you. But if there's any questions, I'd be happy to answer any of them, or if somebody has something in the chat that they want to add. Yeah, oh yes, I love that. Somebody said that they would love to talk to their mom about negativity. I think that a lot of our parents, unfortunately, I have had this conversation myself. So reach out to me in an email and I will give you some role play and comments and things that you can have in that. So, and somebody asked to have my email address one more time. So the hospital is simply just your first name, period, your last name at nkch.org. So you can get a hold of pretty much anybody here. So michelle.lane@nkch.org. And then I've got my email there, but I'm happy to share with anybody. And it doesn't look like we have any questions. I want to thank everybody for their time today. Hopefully this was a quick down and dirty. If you do nothing from this talk today, it's that you start a conversation by authentically owning your part in it. Just start with, I'm sorry. If you don't even know how to formulate the words, just do that. Listen more and stick to whatever the outcome is. One of the favorite things that I say to my kids is, I love you more than I love being right. Right. So especially when you get in a conversation with somebody that you do care about, right? And you do want to be right. And you're like, oh, they are so wrong. And I just think to myself, I love you more than I love being right. And you let it go, because the point is not to be right. The point is connection and having the outcome that you want in this conversation. So thank you so much for your time, and everybody take care.